Good evening. Well, welcome to Soni Irabor Live. Tonight, we'll be dealing with one of those major issues that have bedeviled Nigeria for many months, years, and so on. I'm talking of electricity. You see, electricity has been a recurring decimal of whether or not Nigeria can survive without power. And we have had so many ministers, so many interest groups, and so many very well-intentioned leaders. I say well-intentioned because I believe that whenever they come there, they want to be able to move the decimal to a higher level. And so the last stage was encourage more people to invest in it. And in spite of all that, there's still a major problem. And that problem has to do with, can we go beyond the 5, 6, or 7,000 megawatts to a 230 million population in Nigeria? Can we go above that? Well, if you look at South Africa is going, I think, well over 62 megawatts. So is Egypt, about 80 megawatts. So what is Nigeria doing? I hear that Abia State has now become a 24/7 power-enabled state, the only state in Nigeria. Well, many thanks to Dr. Alex Oti and Batnachi. However, tonight, I'm talking to someone who is an investor who has been involved in it and who seems to understand what the problem really is, that Nigeria has not gone beyond that stage. His name is George Etomi. George Etomi is a well-known lawyer in Nigeria. We all have heard a lot about him. I know him personally, but the power state of Nigeria is a bigger problem. And so I want to humbly welcome Mr. George Etomi. Welcome, sir. And also to ask you, is there a way forward in all of this, my monologue?
Thank you, Soni. Yes, there's a way forward. There's a way forward.
Okay.
And I'm very confident that we'll find a way through the quagmire. The thing to do is that just understand that the power privatization has happened for only 13 years. And given its magnitude, it is expected that the hiccups that are occurring, but what is critical is that if you identify them, then you can begin to place your hand on the button and you begin to then take off the pressure to ensure that you have a seamless interaction through the value chain. The major crisis in the sector is that of liquidity. In other words, the amount of funding that the sector requires is humongous, and not just a one-time infusion of capital. It's going to be a continuous thing throughout the life cycle for as long as people continue to consume power. Therefore, it is important that we put in place laws and regulations that encourage this critical investment. Prior to now, power was essentially delivered as a social service to Nigerians. If you look at when it initially started, and not just power, most things we had at that time, telecoms and all that. So there wasn't as much emphasis on the revenue that was coming into it. Government was simply spending, but at that time population was low, sophistication was also low, so the government could afford it. Now, when we started becoming more in number and our needs became more sophisticated, I agree that perhaps privatizing the power sector should have come before some of the major privatizations we had. And talking about other major privatizations, I'll take you to the banking sector. Remember in this country when we had only 3 major banks, UBA, First Bank, and I think it was Union Bank. And then the merchant banks were just whatever it was. But once the government decided strategically that to meet with Nigeria's ambition to become powerful in the banking sector, they needed to open it to private capital. We then went through what we're going through now in the power sector. We came up with a banking reform plan, which involved legislation that would open up the sector to private capital. And we had it. And over a period, the banking sector started to boom. I'm sure, Soni, you were old enough to remember the tally number days where you went to line up with your tally number to pay me. I mean, if you think about it, we're still alive. We were there. But look at what banking is today. So, but you know, that's been a long, sustained journey. And there were hiccups.
Can I interject there? Can I interject there? I just want to let you know that these have been recurring decimals. Okay, accepted. But then what about prioritization? Priorities, you know, getting our priorities right. You said somewhere in your statement just now that we seem to have not, you know, we should have maybe started power earlier than we did. I will agree with that. Yes, so don't you think that should have been enough reason for us to learn a lesson from all of the mistakes that were made in the past?
Yeah, that's the precise point I was making. I was just sort of taking you through that journey because we eventually successfully privatized the banking sector and we now have a robust banking sector. It had its hiccups. And there were bank failures, people were punished, there were recapitalizations, which are still continuing. Then I'll take you to telecommunications, 400,000 lines. Today we have 200 million because we embraced change. The GSM technology came, changed the landscape. So, but these successful industries all run on power. And what is happening with many of these industries is that many of them are having to self-generate, which is why I said that with the benefit of hindsight, the power privatization should have happened before. Because, and I'm sure we'll get to the Abia case, you will see why it is so critical that you have a power infrastructure that supports industrial development. In any case, we then came to power. So in 2013, the reforms kicked off, the sector was opened up, and government started off with the privatizing, the generating segment, as well as the distribution segment. Transmission, which is the transport of the power between distribution and generation, is still largely in the hands of government, and that's another problem on its own.
Well, so let me also come in there. Sorry, I need to come in there because transmission is the mainstay. Generation is the beginning. Transmission is the end stage of it. Why should government still get involved in transmission? It's a big question for me. And I need you, if you can answer that.
I don't think government is insisting on staying in transmission. Yes, there was a time the argument was that it had to do with national security. We should not allow transmission going into the hands of private whatever. That was the old thinking. But right now the issue is you don't have sufficient enough interest in the private sector for transmission to be privatized because of the nature of our grid. We have a central grid. In other words, almost
why should
all
it
the
be a
power
central grid? Why should it be central? Why should
I'm telling you how it started.
Okay.
When we started, as I said, power was essentially provided as a social service. You had this federal government, they had the power, they gave it out to people. Don't forget, even at that time, there were smaller segments of the country that had power. Jos had its own internal power generating system. But then it was absorbed into the national grid. So we ran a centrally controlled system. And I think we're now beginning to find out that was a mistake. And that's now been corrected in the law. the Electricity Act of 2023, which now allows states to participate in the full value chain. In other words, they can generate, transmit, and distribute power. And that, for me, is a game changer in the power sector. And this is all coming from lessons learned from privatization in 2013 till today. As I mentioned, we privatized generation, we privatized generation, but transmission we saw was a weak link. And now, remember the government tried to concession it, they gave it to Manitoba Hydro of Canada, that didn't quite work out well. And so you have that transporter that is unable to transport the electricity generated. We've increased generating capacity in Nigeria to almost 14,000 megawatts, which it was about 6,000 at the point of privatization. So we've done a lot well in that area.
But that's still very small, if you ask me. 13,000 megawatts is not enough to carry, the kind of population Nigeria is claimed to have, 230 million.
No, I absolutely agree with you. The rule of thumb is that you should have, for, let me say, that steady, uninterrupted power industry, 1,000 megawatts per 1 million of your population. So on paper, Nigeria should be looking at 200,000 megawatts. It doesn't generally work out that way in practice. But so I agree entirely with you. Even at the 13 or 14 generating capacity, it is inadequate. But let's take it baby steps at a time. We're at 5. If we can evacuate 14, it will make a humongous difference. And if it makes a humongous difference, there'll be more investments coming in. You can't go from 0 to 100 just by wishing it. You must take those steps. So, which is why I'm advocating that we stay steady with the privatization, learn the lessons that need to be learned, and then just rejig it in a manner that attracts an investment. The key thing is to attract investment, because once your laws or your regulations are not investor friendly, then you will struggle. And the government itself is struggling, because what was happening is that the difference between the cost of electricity and the cost for which it was being sold was humongous. So governments now started essentially subsidizing it. And it got to a head when we had COVID, when we basically weren't working for 2 years. The lights were kept on. The federal government just basically collapsed under that burden. And that was the first time we saw the doubling of tariffs. That in itself was a problem, because the way we manage our tariff structure is key to the investment that I'm talking about. If you go, as we did under COVID, from a certain amount and double it, it creates what they call tariff shock amongst consumers. And the consequence we have seen for those of us who have invested in the sector is that they bypass their meters. And power theft is one of the biggest threats to the industry. So in other words, we should have planned it in such a manner that would have been incremental increases against the background that services were commensurately improving. And if Nigerians see power, they will pay for it. I think what's irritating everybody is that you are banding me in A, banding me in whatever, but I'm not seeing even what you promised to give me, 20 hours of electricity cumulatively. I'm not even seeing that. That is the problem. Okay. So again, problem identified.
We need to take a break. When we get back, we'll continue where you stopped. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So the question has been, what is delaying Nigeria's advancement to achieving uninterrupted power supply? Now, I'm paraphrasing everything. This wasn't how I started it. My guest is the most respected George Etomi. George Etomi is an investor in the power sector. He's also a famous lawyer. He's paid his dues. But the question is his money and a lot of other people who are in the same sector, who are interested in investing, both international and local, are thinking, are we spending the right money? I'm wondering, Mr. Etomi, please continue from where you stopped, but the question is, are you spending the right money?
As I mentioned to you, the journey from 2013 has seen us to a place where the federal government has now decided that there should be participation in the value proposition of all states. In other words, states can now pass laws, install regulators to look at their immediate sphere of influence. For example, Lagos State has 2 distribution companies that are serving it, Eco, Disco, and Ikeja Electric. So how, for example, can Lagos get power and embed directly into the discos? This is what has happened in Aba. And what has happened with Aba was that Baton Naji, long before now, had identified that there were industrial clusters. Of course, you know the famous industrial hub in Aba needed to have uninterrupted electricity. So they took the pain. It's cost them plenty of money to build transmission lines, distribution facilities. So the problem they had at one stage was where to get the power from. They were depending on the grid for power, because at that time, most people who were producing electricity preferred to sell it to the grid. And from the grid, as I mentioned to you, it was being centrally distributed. That has proved not to be as efficient as we all thought. So what they have done in recent times is been to identify gas producers who give them power directly. So that way they control the supply end and the distribution. And having, of course, dealt with the issue of transmission, they are no longer subject to the vagaries of the national grid. And it's an example that is worthy of emulating. And I will tell you that even though Aba is under Enugu Disco, initially there was a friction in their relationship. One was getting grid power, which was the cheapest source of power, and they didn't have enough, in fairness, to give to the geometric cluster. But since we too rejigged the tariffs, we now have band A, and that has brought, let me say, the tariff to close to the cost. It now made sense for those who are looking for gas producers to give them gas directly to fire their generating plants. So it made sense, therefore, when Governor Oti came to collaborate with Geometric and essentially integrate the Enugu Disco. So from that, they've broadened the sphere from the Aba Industrial Hub. They've now connected Umuahia. So it's going to be done incrementally. By the way, whilst we're on this subject, Edo State actually started something similar with Osiomo plants when the then Governor Obaseki approached the owners of Osiomo to give them gas so that they could also get power directly, because he had issues with BEDC. And the issues were a question of how do you distribute the scarce, insufficient power that was coming from the grid. It was expensive at the time, but as they say, hindsight is 20/20 vision. With the benefit of hindsight, it turned out to be cheaper, because even though it was more expensive than grid power, because it was steady, reliable, it essentially made them retire their generators. And once you take off your generator cost, you take off diesel maintenance and all that, you find that the savings you make actually, in the end, makes the the power you have cheaper. That's what they're also experiencing in Abia today. So most of those industrialists are not bothered about generator. They're not bothered about diesel. They're not, and these are the things that give headache to most industrialists. So we have worthy examples of the direction states should be going, and in giving this advice from the benefit of what I know, I will not advise states to directly put money into it, because power is such an emotional subject. The moment you begin to make promises like politicians will do, I'll give you free this, free that, or steady supply, it means you can begin to get into this subsidy trap. And states should please. The reason the federal government is getting out of that subsidy trap is because it was a distraction to most of its plans. And you notice recently they announced that states were going to start sharing the burden of the subsidy. It's going to hit their pockets. What states just simply need to do is to create, as I said, a legal and regulatory environment. The investors will come in. Because if you think, even at a personal level, what it costs us to self-generate, if you think about what it costs you to buy your generator, to run it, many people are now doing solar. And if you look at all those costs, you can imagine if you have a power source that is steady and reliable, it's ultimately hits your pocket in cheaper than we're experiencing today. Okay. So it's a no-brainer. It's not rocket science. Without power, we cannot industrialize this country. Okay. What holds the key to the diversification of this economy is steady electricity. So for me, it's a no-brainer. We've started the journey. There are hiccups. Let's fix the hiccups and continue.
Okay. Now, where power is emotional, I like the fact that you made that statement, that it's an emotional problem. And again, I know there are many people who may want to phone in once the telephone is displayed on the screen. You are free to call from all parts of the world anyway. But the question again is, what has taken Nigeria that's so much time and the length to make up their mind, the political will to even take the risk? You are an investor. There are many like you, and they will be definitely worried about what should be happening to, the Nigerian situation, the Nigerian people, and power. Let me not lose my flow of thought, but power as an investment that is very important. Nigerians are willing to pay for steady power. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree, absolutely. And from practical example, and that's what we kept saying. Look, at the point of privatization, there were a number of promises that were made to the investors. One, we will allow you charge cost-reflective tariffs. Two, we will clean up your books. Remember, they were taken over from the old NEPA because they need those books for bankability purposes. Three, we will pay, because it was delivered as a service, there were so many debtors, including the ministries, departments, and agencies of government. They were owing a lot of money. They also agreed to clear all those things. But when it came to practicalizing these promises, we started having hiccups, and that's when the journey became difficult from the beginning. And if you recall, privatization happened November 2013. By 2014, we were going into an election. And even though you had promised at privatization that you would allow for cost-reflective tariffs, in other words, there was the expectation that the tariffs would be adjusted to reflect costs, the regulator essentially was told, in fact, drop tariffs. It was an election gimmick. And they dropped the tariffs, which was a major breach of the agreement they had with investors.
From what you are saying, politics has not played a very viable role in the whole process.
Yes, politics always interferes. And that's why I told you it's a very emotional subject, because it's a high campaign thing. I will give you power, I will give you. They make the promises because, as I told you, there's what I call the happiness quotient embedded in electricity. You think about when you are at some venue where they're watching football, the power just goes. You see the whole disappointment and everything. Conversely, let the power come back and everybody screams as if a goal has been scored. It hits that's why I say it's a highly emotional subject, and that's why it's also highly political. But we must ensure that we do not allow the politics to interfere. And that's why my advice to the state governments is that now that you are coming as major players, learn the lessons of the federal government. Just create enabling environments, and the private sector will come in. And when they come in, just give them the promises. Nigerians that I know, look, let's look at an average Nigerian who has let me say, a small generator, but it will set him back a few millions. Diesel cost will take him several 100,000 a month. He has solar embedded. Everything. This will tell you how important power is to so many of these people. I'm not even talking about the heavy hitters, like the industrialists. And by the end of the day, you find that almost all the income you make is going into self-generation. Why would any Nigerian go on with that sort of a burden? So you must, therefore, the only thing you do is plan it for them. For example, when they introduced the banding system, I would have said, instead of quadrupling the tariffs for those they call Band A, they could have done it in such a way that they should have evened out everything and then come up with a robust plan and tell them every 3 months, every 6 months, you will experience X amount of tariff increase. Against that, you'll expect this sort of power, and you continue to do incrementally so that people can plan. Okay. To go from 20K a month to 80K a month is not planning. You are disrupting people's lives. Okay. So, and that's always a tricky situation, how to manage the tariff. So we'll come to metering later, because consumers have their own issues. I mentioned to you that power theft is one of the biggest issues in the sector. So in as much as we keep saying government to play its role, consumers too have a role to play. Yes. It's tough when many of them over the years are used to taking this power and not paying for it. So Nigeria, many consumers don't have any qualms bypassing their meters, and it's not helped by unscrupulous members of the discos who essentially offer their services to do that. It's unpatriotic, it's a crime, and you are not contributing your own quota towards national development if you do that.
Okay, let me ask you 2 questions. But first, let me recount an experience. I went to see a friend in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, in 1996. And there was a notice that there will be power outage for 14 hours on a Tuesday. And it was like that once a week. That was 1996 in Ethiopia. So I asked myself, from then I said, how come Nigeria doesn't have that kind of planning, arrangement where the consumer will be informed in time that there will be an outage for service, and then for that reason you'll be able to do a few things. But the second issue is this: Band A, Band B, Band whatever. Even Band A, you did not give enough power to cover the amount of tariff on Band A. Neither did you for Band B. So there's no trust. That's the whole question. What do we do about all of this? The issue of not letting the people know in time, and then the issue of Band A and B and C.
I will tell you what the problem is. It's a scaling problem. Don't forget, in Nigeria, there was a time NEPA used to issue those notices. But at that time, power consumers were relatively few. They could plan. They knew the amount of power that was available. They knew the consumers, and they knew how they were distributed. Our problem in Nigeria is that we are growing humongously bigger than we're planning to accept to deal with the growth. That's why I said that the biggest thing states can do for themselves now, the central grid system now being sort of decentralized, is to just see how they can cater for the needs power needs of those in their states. When you plan for a smaller group like we're seeing with Geometric in Aba and by extension Abia, I hope the Osiomo thing will be revived and all that. When you begin to do those sort of incremental things, you can plan. So it's all about scale. Our population is growing so much faster and more sophisticated than government is able to plan for. Look, I was involved in the privatization of the telecoms sector from a legal standpoint. And I still remember in one of my visits to MTN when they were coming in, they were initially planning to roll out 1 million lines, which looked so huge at that time. And I told them, look, that thing will not leave Ikeja. But you see, at that time, landlines, installed landlines were about 400,000. So when somebody says I'm bringing 1 million, it looked huge. But I was right. They came in there in no time at all. Because once Nigerians saw a service that met their needs, they were willing to pay. And don't forget, to get SIM card, you had to pay like almost 50K to get it. It was huge. But what happened was, the moment the regulator allowed the system to go, competition came in. And through competition, we now have where SIM cards are virtually free. There was a time we were told you couldn't do per second billing. You could only if you talk for 10 seconds, you pay for 1 minute. But now that's not happening anymore. So we're not even thinking about disruptions in that sector. Billions are coming in, billions are going out. It's fungible. But the exponential growth effect on the economy cannot be, you cannot even imagine it. Some people work on their phones. They don't even open physical offices. And because your house boy, your house girl, your son, your mother, everybody has it, it's not even an object of envy. And that's the way we should be thinking electricity. Right. I go to these successful cases because they were done midwifed by Nigerians. And that's why I believe in the Nigerian spirit. It can be done. Look, if we're talking power today, Soni, 10, 20 years ago, we would not even have been able to even discuss the subject. That's the power of privatization. It makes knowledge, it democratizes knowledge in the area. And now people are interrogating more. Well, so gone are those days, you can't tell people anything, anyhow, any day.
Exactly.
It just can't happen.
The question
and then, like I said, I'd like for us to discuss metering because we also need to hold ourselves accountable for the power we take.
Let me ask a question here. Are you sure there's political will on the one hand because of the way politicians have been accused of spending money that they just don't seem to know how they earned it? The second issue is, how do we incur trust between the consumers and those, the regulators, so to speak, government?
No,
there's no trust.
I'm glad, before I address the trust issue, this conspicuous consumption, and that is why I said with states coming into the fray, they have to reprioritize. Because honestly speaking, the liquidity required in the power sector is so huge that if states do not reprioritize their spending, there's so much waste in government today. The governor or everybody's going somewhere, 50-man convoy, 100-man convoy, it's car convoys. It's not going to happen again going forward. And if you do it, something will suffer. And that means you will suffer electorally. People are at their wits' end. So it's, like I said, it's all about reprioritization. Because the truth is that if you give priority to power, it will industrialize your state. Economic activities will increase. Standard of living will increase. So you can even tax people based on the upping of their standard of living. So it's the multiplier effect is huge. So it's a bit of a tragedy to still think we're talking about 5,000 megawatts 13 months after privatization. South Africa is lying somewhere around 55,000 megawatts for 50,000 megawatts for a population of 55 million. And you mentioned some other examples. That is the league we should be playing in. Now, let me address the issue of trust. The biggest concern, and that's from direct experience, many consumers have, is that too many failed promises. You are, as I told you, you didn't manage, in my opinion, tariff increases very well. We didn't manage it well. So people just found themselves, they could tolerate you when the tariff was low.
Okay.
So even
we have a caller from Port
steady.
Harcourt. We have a caller from Port Harcourt.
All right.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, good evening, sir. Thank you very much for this program. I think it's one of the best programs so far that I had now. Now, the issue of power is one of the things that is affecting everyone, even in the village. And with that power, there's no business. Even those who are doing barbing, whatever we do in Nigeria, it requires power. Even the woman that is in the village that is blending akara, it need power. Okay, so now the question is that, is it actually that the government is ready, or on the other word, that there is any willingness for the government to provide power? Your guests talk about how the telecom industry was privatized and everything that was issued before has already completely eroded, completely taken out. Now, with regard to the power, I believe that someone is already sitting on it. Because if you can see currently now, you see that almost most of the shops you see, they are selling generators. If the government actually want to give us power, you will see that the generator issue, importing generator, will be reduced. And also, another thing that we discovered, that they will increase tariff in importation of generators. And most of the people who are importing these generators are the people who are working for maybe from the government. Another issue is that the issue of this metering. Why is the government not making the metering available for people? This distribution company are so much interested in this how do we call it, this estimated bill, making it very difficult.
Thank you.
To even get the power.
Thank you very much. Let's give the guest a chance to answer your question. Yes.
Thank you.
Mention. You are so right, because you begin to wonder, we've talked so much, we realize the importance of power, and yet it is not happening. Is it because it's being sabotaged? I think that is his concern. Remember, there's thinking, even in why our refinery is not working, it's the same argument. It's a no-brainer that if you refine your crude, you get more byproducts of crude that will industrialize your country. But for some inexplicable reason, we've not been able to sort out our refineries. Is it because some people have vested interests? So it's a very valid question. And my solution, my answer to that, that's why I said privatize it. Once you begin to privatize it, look, the only thing that makes discos make money is if they sell you power. So they have it's not a product you can hoard if you have it and say, let me wait until the price is high and then I'll produce it. You can't store power. So once it comes out, you must push it. So privatization is the route to go. In spite of all we have said, things have moved better than it was before. Okay. So the thing is, how do we then build on what we now have done? On the issue of metering, yeah, metering is what we were talking about, trust, before his call came in. It's meters that create the trust between a distribution company and the consumer. Nobody wants to be cheated. Nobody wants to pay for power that he did not get. So metering, there has been so many metering initiatives. Again, the problem we plagued with Nigeria is that the numbers outgrow what we planned for. at the point of privatization, there was a plan to meter about 4 million. The consumers on paper were like 4 million. Today, we have figures between 12 and 20 million. Meters are not produced overnight. And initially, it was meant to be the responsibility of the discos. But for discos who were not getting cost-reflective tariffs, they were not even getting enough from what they were selling. Why would they go and put money into meters? So government took their responsibility out, created MAP, meter asset providers. Now they're getting a national mass metering program. Most recently, we now have the program-supported DISREP from the World Bank. So we are addressing the metering problem. Okay. And I agree completely with Ayo. That's what creates a trust, because nature abhors a vacuum. If you don't give the meters, unscrupulous discos will throw estimated bills at you. And because everybody needs that product, they have no choice but to go and pay for electricity that they have not consumed.
Yes, we would like
that can be very annoying.
Yes, we'll take a short break. Sorry, we'll take a short break right now, our last break, and then we'll be right back to our guest. Yes, Mr. George Etomi, what's the way forward, since we're in the last lap of our program? What's the way forward?
I mentioned to you is, one, the decentralization has happened. Two, states should step up the plate, and we've given you successful examples in Abia, Edo. I hope they go back to the Osiomo experiment. It was good. Three, states should look at their relative areas of comparable advantage. Enugu State has coal. So in addition to whatever supply they get from the grid, they should be thinking about how they can work those coal mines, because it's a source of energy. Then we have to think about an energy mix. Solar, the northern states are very strong with good sunshine. They're blessed with good sunshine. So they can begin to look at the solar alternative. We need that energy mix. Then let's not even forget waste to power, because there's a lot of waste in this country, and so we need that energy mix. If you do that, then you would have, let me say, increase your ability to scale up your generating capacity. Now, with the state getting involved, transmission will still be tricky because it's so capital intensive to get those lines. I'm not saying the national grid will not go away, but states must begin to look at how they can do transmitting internally. Three, rural electrification. Because of the solar content, we should also begin to reach out to the rural population. That's what Ayo spoke about. The woman who grinds pepper or who does akara, the vulcanizer, they need it. Today, there are what they call battery as a service that's provided to rural dwellers. What they do is that they have these solar-powered batteries. They do it when you want to battery power your car. You go, take it, you plug it to a system, it gives you power, sufficient power to deal with your needs. And then when it's going, you go back, you take a new one, change it. That's happening in the rural areas. So whilst rural electrification is happening, dealing with all those things, you then concentrate on your industrial, those are the heavy hitters. Just make it attractive enough for them not to spend humongous amounts of monies to self-generate. But they will not do so except they see what I call steady electricity. It's not a question of 20 hours. Some of their equipment cannot afford even 1 minute downtime. So you must get to that point where you can guarantee them uninterrupted in the true sense of it, and do that. And like I told you, what is the benefit to us as Nigerians? The country gets fully industrialized. We diversify economy. This over-reliance on crude oil will disappear because Nigerians will step up and basically control their destinies. This is what we need. The distraction of having to spend too much money on self-generation is something we must all move away from. This is the way forward for the power sector.
Thank you so much.
And then, of course, metering. Let me not metering, let me not overlook that, because at the end of the day, what creates that trust between consumer and the distribution company is the metering. And luckily, there's a robust metering plan going on. We must continue with it, because once we don't argue over who owes who what, I think a lot of temperature will come down.
Thank you so much, Mr. George Etomi, the founder of George Etomi and Partners. He's also a major investor in the power sector of Nigeria. And your advice is very well taken by me, and I hope, honestly, those that matter are listening and will take the advice, because it means a whole lot. Other African countries, other countries of the world are getting good power. Why not Nigeria? On that note, thank you all so much. Mr. George Etomi, God bless you. And for you that viewers at home and those that called in, thank you so much. Till next week. Good night.